Trade tensions between the European Union and the United States are heating up again. The EU finds itself facing a familiar challenge: tariffs and aggressive demands from U.S. President Trump, who's back with a hardline approach to global trade. But this time, Europe isn't staying silent. The EU is pushing back. It's standing firm, not out of pride, but because it believes these trade actions are unfair and harmful to both sides. European leaders are making it clear they didn't start this, but they're determined to fix it. They want cooperation, not conflict, but if pushed, they're ready to act. In this video, we'll break down exactly what's happening, how the trade dispute started, what Trump is demanding, and how the EU is responding. The spark ignites. In early 2025, President Trump announces a new round of tariffs targeting major global imports. A 25% tariff on steel and a 10% tariff on aluminum are introduced, with the justification centered around national security concerns. The decision immediately raises concerns among America's trade partners, especially the European Union, which finds itself directly in the line of fire. The EU is stunned. As one of the United States' closest economic allies, it had not expected to be hit with such measures. The announcement revives tensions that had briefly cooled in recent years, bringing back the threat of a full-scale trade dispute. European leaders are quick to respond, voicing strong objections across multiple platforms. Officials from across the continent condemn the tariffs, calling them unfair and damaging to long-standing transatlantic relations. They argue that these actions not only disrupt global trade, but also strain the cooperation that both sides have relied on for decades. For the EU, this moment marks the beginning of yet another fight to defend its economic interests, this time with even more at stake. But how does the European Union respond when a close ally suddenly turns up the pressure? Do they back down, or do they push back with a strategy of their own? The EU's strategic countermove. The European Union doesn't wait long to respond. Refusing to stay passive, EU leaders come together to craft a measured but firm counterattack. Their strategy is clear: respond with targeted tariffs of their own. They approve a plan to reinstate duties on a range of American products, many of which were specifically chosen to hit politically sensitive regions. Items like bourbon whiskey, motorcycles, and denim jeans are among the first on the list. In total, the EU targets around 8 billion euros worth of US goods. These choices are not random. They're designed to put economic pressure on American industries while signaling that Europe is ready to stand its ground. The approach is careful and calibrated, avoiding escalation while still making an impact. The EU's message through this countermeasure is unmistakable. It will protect its economic interests, but at the same time, it's not closing the door on diplomacy. European officials emphasize that they're still willing to negotiate and that cooperation remains their preferred path. However, any resolution must be fair and based on mutual respect. The move sends a strong signal to Washington. Europe is not backing down, but it's still open to dialogue. With both sides locked in a growing standoff, the question becomes, can diplomacy still find a way through the tension? The offer of reconciliation. Amid rising tensions and economic pushback, the European Union makes a move toward compromise. In an effort to de-escalate the situation, EU leaders propose a 0-for-0 tariff deal on industrial goods. The idea is simple. Both sides agree to eliminate tariffs in specific sectors, creating a level playing field that benefits everyone. The offer reflects the EU's long-standing belief in open markets and fair trade, and it's put forward as a serious attempt to calm the growing trade dispute. This proposal isn't new. In fact, the EU has had the authority to negotiate such an agreement since 2019. But now, with pressure building, it brings the idea back to the table, hoping to open a productive dialogue with Washington. European officials present the plan as a win-win solution: reduced tariffs, stronger economic ties, and a chance to rebuild trust. But the response from President Trump is immediate and firm. He rejects the offer outright. Instead of discussing tariff reductions, he issues a new demand. The EU must commit to purchasing $350 billion worth of American energy products in exchange for any tariff relief. This unexpected condition changes the conversation entirely. For European leaders, the demand is seen as unrealistic and one-sided, making it clear that a quick resolution is unlikely. With negotiations taking a sharp turn and the offer of compromise rejected, the next question is obvious: how far is the European Union willing to go to defend its position? The EU's firm stance. As talks drag on without progress, the European Union takes a decisive step forward. European leaders, after weeks of internal discussions and coordination, present a united front to the world. Their message is firm and deliberate. The EU supports fair trade, open dialogue, and mutual respect, but it will not be intimidated. They reject the idea that trade policy should be shaped by threats, conditions, or ultimatums. In press conferences and official statements, EU officials speak with one voice. They underline their commitment to defending European industries, jobs, and the stability of the single market. The EU, they insist, is not seeking confrontation, but when faced with tactics they view as coercive or unfair, they are fully prepared to respond. They stress that this conflict was not of their making, but they will not allow it to escalate unchecked. Behind the scenes, member states reaffirmed their support for a collective approach. From France and Germany to the smaller economies in Eastern and Southern Europe, the bloc remains aligned on its strategy. This solidarity becomes one of the EU's greatest strengths in the negotiation process. It allows them to speak with authority, not as individual countries, but as a unified economic power. European industries, many of which are directly impacted by the tariffs and countermeasures, also rally behind the EU's stance. Business leaders call for stability and predictability, warning that drawn-out uncertainty could hurt investment and growth, yet they support the need for a strong response, recognizing that giving in to pressure could set a dangerous precedent for future negotiations. For the EU, this is about more than tariffs. It's about maintaining the integrity of its economic system and the principles it stands for. Fair competition, mutual benefit, and respect for international agreements are all part of that foundation. If those principles are undermined, the consequences could extend far beyond this dispute. So while the door to dialogue remains open, the EU makes one thing clear: it won't trade away its core values just to restore calm. It will stand its ground for its economy, its credibility, and its future. The global implications. The trade conflict between the European Union and the United States sends shockwaves far beyond Brussels and Washington. As tensions escalate, the effects begin to ripple across the global economy. Businesses and governments around the world are paying close attention, and for good reason. These are not just two major economies in dispute. They represent massive export markets, global supply chain hubs, and financial powerhouses that influence worldwide trade flows. International markets respond quickly. Stock exchanges in Europe, North America, and Asia fluctuate as investors react to each new development. Any hint of worsening relations between the EU and the US sparks uncertainty. Companies tied to international manufacturing, logistics, and exports start preparing for the worst. They look at potential delays, rising costs, and the possibility of new trade barriers that could hurt profits and long-term plans. Industries most vulnerable to the fallout, such as automotive, technology, steel, agriculture, and consumer goods, begin to slow production or rethink their sourcing strategies. Multinational firms are particularly affected, caught in the middle of a policy dispute that could undermine their global operations. Some start seeking alternative suppliers or shifting production to other regions as a precaution. Meanwhile, emerging economies that rely on stable trade with both regions grow increasingly concerned. Countries in Asia, Africa, and Latin America worry that the uncertainty could impact their own exports or foreign investment. With supply chains already stretched from past global disruptions, the added weight of an EU-US trade standoff only makes the outlook more fragile. Economists warn that this isn't just a short-term scuffle. It could lead to long-term structural changes in how trade is conducted. The longer the tension lasts, the more likely it is to trigger permanent shifts in trade alliances and global economic strategies. The idea of a fractured trade landscape, where economic blocs drift further apart instead of cooperating, becomes a serious concern. In the worst-case scenario, a prolonged trade war could slow global growth, weaken confidence in international institutions, and make recovery harder for countries still bouncing back from recent crises. Even sectors not directly tied to steel, aluminum, or industrial goods could suffer from reduced investment, falling demand, and unstable financial markets. As the EU and US move deeper into the dispute, leaders around the world begin urging caution. International organizations call for restraint, encouraging both sides to return to the table. There's growing recognition that the consequences of this conflict won't stop at national borders. They'll affect workers, families, and economies around the world. This is no longer just a dispute over tariffs. It's a turning point in global trade, with consequences that could reshape how countries interact, compete, and collaborate for years to come. The path forward. Despite rising tensions and sharp exchanges, both the European Union and the United States continue to leave room for resolution. Behind the scenes, talks remain ongoing. Trade officials and diplomatic teams on both sides are still in contact, working through proposals, counteroffers, and long-term strategies. While public statements remain firm, there are signs that neither side is ready to completely close the door on negotiation. There is cautious optimism that common ground can still be found. The EU continues to emphasize its preference for fair, rules-based trade, while the US insists on stronger protections for its domestic industries. These goals may differ, but they are not impossible to reconcile. Previous trade disagreements between the two have been resolved through persistence, compromise, and a shared interest in global stability, and there is hope that this situation can follow the same path. What's clear is that any future agreement must be built on mutual respect. For the EU, that means maintaining its sovereignty and refusing one-sided conditions. For the US, it means ensuring that its industries are not disadvantaged by external competition. Navigating this balance won't be easy, but it is essential if both sides want to avoid long-term damage and preserve their influence on the global stage. Around the world, governments, markets, and international organizations are watching closely. The outcome of this standoff will set a precedent, not just for how these two powers engage, but for how global trade is handled in an increasingly divided world. The stakes are high, and the consequences will ripple far beyond the negotiating table. As discussions continue, one hope remains constant: that diplomacy will succeed where confrontation has failed. With strong leadership and a shared focus on stability, the possibility of reaching a fair and lasting agreement is still within reach. In the face of adversity, the European Union remains steadfast, advocating for collaboration over confrontation. Their message resonates: we won't be bullied, we didn't start this, we're trying to fix it.